Before we dive into this unbelievable story, let me ask you something. What if the man you've seen driving muscle cars across skyscrapers, defeating villains against all odds, and standing for family above everything, suddenly stepped into an ordinary restaurant with no cameras, no red carpet, and no spotlight? What if that man, Vin Diesel, himself, walked through the doors of a place he secretly owned only to stumble upon something that would test the very core of who he was? You're about to hear a story that will shake you, move you, and make you believe in the power of listening, kindness, and the choices that change lives forever. But before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like these are not just entertainment, they're journeys into the human heart. And trust me, you won't want to miss the next one. Vin Diesel had always lived his life balancing two worlds, the world of Hollywood, with flashing lights, big budgets, and fans chanting his name, and the world inside himself, the quiet one that no director, no franchise, and no critic ever saw. Fame had made him wealthy, yes, but it had also made him yearn for something real, something untouched by the glitter. That was why, years ago, in complete secrecy, Vin had purchased a small, rustic restaurant tucked away in a quieter part of Los Angeles. It wasn't branded with his name. There was no neon sign screaming celebrity ownership to the outside world. It was just another cozy, family-run place with warm lighting, mismatched chairs, and the kind of menu that reminded people of home. Vin never told the press. Not his fans. Not even most of his friends in Hollywood. The only people who knew were the general manager, a middle-aged man named Gordon, who had once been Vin's childhood neighbor, and a handful of staff sworn to silence. For Vin, this place wasn't a business investment, it was a sanctuary. On most days, Vin stayed away. He let Gordon handle everything. But every now and then, when the weight of fame grew too heavy, Vin disguised himself in a hoodie, baseball cap, and glasses, and he would slip into the restaurant unnoticed, just another customer among the regulars. It gave him peace, seeing strangers laugh, clink glasses, and share meals under the roof he had built. But on one chilly evening in early autumn, something pulled him there with unusual urgency. The day had been long a press event, back-to-back interviews, and endless questions about his next Fast and Furious project. By the time he left the hotel ballroom, his head was pounding. He wanted silence. He wanted warmth. He wanted to remember why he did any of it, and so, without alerting anyone, he drove his car through side streets, parked 2 blocks away, and walked quietly to his hidden haven. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with life. Couples leaned close over candlelight. A group of college kids laughed at a corner table. A young family tried to keep their toddler from toppling a glass of water. It was perfect. Normal. Human. Vin slipped into a back booth, tugging his cap lower over his eyes. A waitress approached, cheerful but tired, and handed him a menu. "Evening," she said. "What can I get started for you?" He smiled faintly, ordered something simple, and leaned back to watch the life around him. But as he did, a sound sliced through the background, chatter, a muffled, broken sob. At first he thought he imagined it, but then he heard it again, soft, shaky, coming from the corridor near the staff break room. He turned his head, frowning. There, half hidden in the shadow of the doorway, stood a young server in uniform, her back pressed against the wall, her hands covering her face as she tried to stifle her crying. She looked like she couldn't be older than 21. Something about the rawness of it stopped him cold. Vin wasn't supposed to get involved. He was here to blend in, to just be another face, but his instincts, the same instincts that made him leap out of cars on set and defend his co-stars like family, wouldn't let him sit still. He waited until the waitress returned with his drink. Then quietly he rose from the booth, keeping his disguise in place, and moved toward the corridor. The closer he got, the clearer it became. Her whole body trembled with silent sobs. She was trying not to be noticed, clearly terrified of drawing attention. Vin glanced around. Nobody else seemed to have heard. The laughter and clinking of glasses drowned her out. He hesitated. He knew if he said something, if he revealed himself, even partially, the secrecy of this place might be compromised. But then she let out a choked whisper, one that made his chest tighten. "I can't do this anymore." Those 5 words were enough. He stepped forward. "Hey," he said softly, his voice deep, calm, but gentle. The girl startled, wiping at her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself. I'm fine," she stammered, shaking her head. "Sorry, I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I'll get back to work." She tried to brush past him, but Vin placed a careful hand on the doorframe, blocking her without trapping her. "Take a breath," he said. "You don't have to explain, but you don't look fine." The girl froze, then let out a shaky laugh, bitter and hollow. "You wouldn't understand." Vin's eyes softened. If only she knew who he was. If only she knew he had seen more darkness than most people could imagine. Loss, betrayal, the crushing weight of responsibility. "Maybe I wouldn't," he admitted, "but maybe I would. Try me." For a long moment, she said nothing. Her chest heaved as she wrestled with whether to trust him. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "I'm scared. I might lose everything." Vin didn't press further. He simply nodded. "Then you're stronger than you think. You're still here, still standing." Sometimes that's enough. Her eyes flickered to his, searching, confused by the calm authority in his words. She didn't recognize him, not yet, but in that moment, something shifted. She exhaled, steadier than before. "Thank you," she murmured, before slipping back into the break room. Vin watched her go, unease curling in his gut. Something about her fear, the way she said lose everything, gnawed at him. He returned to his booth, but the food before him had lost its appeal. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that this night, this girl, and her unseen pain were about to pull him into something far bigger than a quiet dinner. Vin Diesel sat in that booth long after the girl had slipped away, his untouched plate growing cold in front of him. The buzz of the restaurant carried on as though nothing had happened, glasses clinking, forks scraping, laughter spilling from corners, but Vin's mind was somewhere else entirely. He had seen too much raw fear in that young woman's eyes for it to be dismissed as just a rough shift or a bad day. The way she had whispered about losing everything haunted him, and though every instinct told him to keep his cover, to remain invisible, he couldn't ignore the knot twisting in his gut. Family, that word wasn't just a catchphrase for the movies. It was his compass in life. He had built his career, his friendships, even this restaurant on the belief that you never abandon someone standing on the edge. After a while, he pushed his plate away and stood. Instead of heading for the door, he drifted casually toward the staff corridor, careful not to draw attention. He moved like a shadow, blending in, but his mind was sharp, scanning every detail. The break room door was slightly ajar, and through the narrow gap he saw her again. She sat hunched over a small metal table, her uniform wrinkled, her hair coming loose from its bun. In her trembling hands, she clutched a crumpled letter. Tears slipped silently down her face as she read it over and over. Vin couldn't make out the words, but whatever was written there was breaking her. He hesitated. He had no right to invade her privacy, but then the door creaked wider on its hinges, betraying his presence. Her head jerked up, eyes wide, caught between embarrassment and fear. "I'm sorry," Vin said gently, holding up his hands. "I wasn't spying. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." The girl blinked at him, confusion crossing her face. "You're that guy from earlier," she said, voice shaky. Then she shook her head. "Please, just go. I don't want to drag a customer into my mess." Vin stepped inside, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "Sometimes it helps to share the load," he said. "You don't know me, and I don't know you, but maybe that's why it's easier. No judgment, just talk." Her hands trembled as she folded the letter shut, hiding it. For a moment, Vin thought she would stay silent. But then, in a rush, the words spilled out. "It's my brother," she whispered. He's in trouble. And if I can't come up with the money he owes by the end of this week, they're coming after him, and me. I don't know what to do." Vin's jaw tightened. He didn't need to ask who they were. He had grown up around streets where debt collectors weren't polite men in suits, but shadows that moved in the night, leaving bruises and broken lives behind. "How much?" he asked carefully. Her lips trembled. "Too much more than I'll ever make waiting tables. I've been picking up double shifts, selling everything I can, but it's not enough. It'll never be enough." She buried her face in her hands again, muffling a sob. "And my brother, he's all I have. Our parents are gone. If they hurt him..." Vin's chest burned. He had heard variations of this story too many times, but that didn't make it easier. The girl her Namatagreed Emily was fighting a battle no one her age should face. And here she was, crying alone in a break room while the world outside clinked glasses. Oblivious. For a long moment, Vin said nothing. He wasn't sure how much of himself he should reveal. But then, with quiet conviction, he said, "You're not alone in this. Not anymore." Emily looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" Vin leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "I mean that when people stand together, things change. I can't promise miracles, but I don't walk away when family is at stake. And right now, you and your brother, your family." Something flickered in her eyes, doubt, hope, disbelief, all tangled together. "Why would you care?" she whispered. "You don't even know me?" Vin allowed the faintest smile. "Because once upon a time, someone cared about me when they didn't have to. Saved me from going down a road I wouldn't come back from. I owe that forward." Emily's lip quivered as fresh tears welled. She nodded once, unable to speak. Vin reached into his pocket and pulled out a slip of paper, scribbling his personal number. "If anything happens, if anyone shows up, threatens you, anything, call me, no matter the hour." He slid it across the table. "And don't be afraid. Fear only wins if you let it." She stared at the number, then back at him. Who are you really?" she asked softly. Vin hesitated. He tugged his cap lower. "Just someone who believes in family," he said, before rising to leave. But as he stepped out into the restaurant again, his heart thundered. He had seen enough in Emily's eyes to know this wasn't just a sad story, it was a storm waiting to break, and whether he liked it or not, he was already caught in it. That night, Vin couldn't sleep. Back in his sprawling Los Angeles home, surrounded by luxury most people only dreamed of, his mind replayed the break room scene over and over. Emily's tears, the desperation in her voice, the word he thought of his own childhood, of scrapes with men who made their money by preying on weakness. He had escaped that life. But not everyone had the same luck. And now, One of his own staffs, one under the roof of his secret restaurant, was in danger. He couldn't stand by. So the next evening, Vin returned to the restaurant, not as a customer this time, but as its silent owner. He pulled Gordon aside in his office, closing the door firmly. "That's server Emily," Vin said. "What do you know about her?" Gordon blinked, surprised. "Emily, she's only been here a couple months. Hard worker, never complains. The staff likes her. Why?" Vin's expression hardened. "Because she's in trouble, and we're not going to ignore it." Gordon frowned, concern etching his features. "What kind of trouble?" Vin didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, "Do you have her address?" Gordon hesitated, then nodded. "I do, but Vin, are you sure this is something you want to get involved in? You've worked hard to keep this place off the radar." Vin's gaze was steady. "Family first. Always. Give me the address." Gordon studied him for a moment, then sighed and pulled out a file. Vin took the slip of paper, his resolve solidifying. He wasn't just going to watch Emily sink under the weight of threats and debts. He was going to face whatever shadows haunted her, and he had no intention of losing. That night, Vin drove across town, down streets where neon signs flickered and apartment buildings sagged under years of neglect. Emily's address led him to a cramped, run-down complex with peeling paint and broken stair rails. He parked quietly and approached. Through a dimly lit window, he saw her inside, sitting at a small kitchen table with a young man about her age, his face bruised, his hands trembling. They were arguing in hushed tones, the kind born of fear rather than anger. Vin's fists clenched. This was it. This was the storm, and he was stepping right into its center. Vin Diesel had faced many tense moments in his life, both on-screen and off, but standing outside Emily's apartment that night, staring through the grimy window at the bruised young man slumped across from her, he felt something far heavier than adrenaline. This wasn't a movie. There was no script, no stunt team to choreograph the fight, no director to yell cut. If he stepped into this, the consequences would be real, permanent, and messy. But he couldn't turn away. His instincts, the same ones that had guided him through years of challenges, told him this was the moment that mattered. He knocked lightly, then waited. Inside, Emily stiffened, her eyes darting to the door. The young man, her brother, no doubt tensed like a cornered animal. She whispered something, trying to calm him, then opened the door a crack. Her face went pale when she saw Vin standing there, hood pulled low. "You," she breathed, half shocked, half frightened. "Emily," Vin said quietly, "we need to talk." Her brother shot to his feet, fists clenched. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice raw. Vin stepped inside, uninvited but steady, letting the door close behind him. He kept his voice calm. "Name's Vin, and if I'm right, you're the brother she's been breaking herself to protect." The young man's eyes flickered with both suspicion and shame. His face bore the hardened lines of someone who had already seen too much trouble for his years. "You don't know anything about it?" he snapped. Vin studied him for a long moment. "Maybe not, but I know the look of someone drowning. And I know what happens when the sharks smell blood in the water. So tell me, who do you?" The silence that followed was thick. Emily's brother swallowed hard, his bravado faltering. Emily's hands trembled as she touched his arm. "Just tell him, Daniel," she whispered. "He wants to help." Daniel's jaw tightened, shame clouding his eyes. Finally, he muttered, "It's not just some loan. It's Reyes." Vin's stomach dropped. He knew that name, not from tabloids, not from gossip, but from whispers in the underworld of Los Angeles, a man who controlled debts, drugs, and fear like a puppeteer. Reyes wasn't a collector. He was a predator. Once he had his hooks in you, there was no easy escape, and now Daniel had fallen into his snare. "How much?" Vin asked. Though he already suspected money alone wouldn't fix this, Daniel hesitated, then forced the word out. 30 grand. Vin exhaled slowly. It wasn't pocket change, not even for someone like him, but it wasn't impossible either. The problem was that Reyes never played fair. Paying him once would only open the door to more demands, more control. Veng turned his gaze back to Emily. "When does he expect it?" Emily's eyes shimmered with tears. "End of the week." She whispered, "He's sent men already. They said if it's not ready, Daniel won't walk away." The room went silent. Daniel looked away, ashamed, his bruises telling their own story. Vin's decision crystallized in that instant. He couldn't just write a check and hope Reyes vanished. This was bigger than money. It was about breaking chains, and he wasn't going to let Emily or her brother carry this alone. "Listen to me," Vin said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "You're not going to face this man alone. Not now, not ever again." Emily blinked, stunned. "But why would you?" "Because family doesn't turn its back," Vin cut in. "I told you, you're family now, and family protects its own." For a moment, neither sibling spoke. Then Daniel slumped back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Reyes doesn't just let go. If you step in, he'll come after you too." Vin allowed a grim smile. "Let him try." Over the next few days, Vin moved with quiet precision. He visited the restaurant daily, careful not to raise suspicion, but always keeping an eye on Emily. He learned more about her life, how she and Daniel had grown up after their parents died in a car accident, how she had dropped out of college to support him, how she worked endless shifts just to keep food on their table. She was tougher than she looked, but beneath it all she was fragile, stretched to the breaking point. Meanwhile, Vin began digging into Reyes. His contacts, people he trusted from the darker corners of Hollywood security circles, fed him details. Reyes ran an operation out of a club downtown, using legitimate businesses as fronts for laundering. He had a small army of enforcers, all loyal, all dangerous, and his reputation was built on one thing: fear. But Vin wasn't afraid. If anything, he was angrier than he had been in years. Here was a man profiting off the suffering of the vulnerable, threatening kids like Daniel who had stumbled but didn't, deserved to be destroyed. And Vin knew something Reyes didn't. He wasn't just another desperate mark. He was Vin Diesel. Still, he couldn't act recklessly. If Reyes learned who he was too soon, it could put Emily and Daniel in even more danger. So Vin planned, quietly, carefully. The twist came sooner than expected. It was Thursday night, 3 days before Reyes's deadline, when Emily's phone buzzed at work. She stepped outside to answer, and Vin, watching from his booth, saw her go pale. She hung up and stumbled back inside, shaking. Vin was on his feet before she could reach the kitchen. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Emily's lips trembled. "They took him," she whispered. "Daniel. They have him." The words hit like a thunderclap. Vin didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Emily closed behind. The address came through minutes later, texted to Emily's phone from an unknown number. A warehouse near the docks. Classic. Vin's jaw clenched as he drove. Emily in the passenger seat, fear etched across her face. When they arrived, the place was a fortress of shadows, lit only by a few flickering bulbs. Vin parked a block away. "Stay here," he ordered. Emily shook her head violently. "No, he's my brother. I'm not letting him face this alone." Vin's heart tightened. She had the same fire he admired in his own family, but he couldn't let her walk into danger. "Emily," he said softly, gripping her hand, "you've done more than enough. Let me carry this now." For a moment, she looked like she would argue, but then tears welled in her eyes, and she nodded, whispering, "Please, bring him back." Vin slipped into the night. Inside the warehouse, the air reeked of oil and dust. Voices echoed harsh, mocking. Vin followed the sound until he saw them, half a dozen men surrounding Daniel, who was tied to a chair, his face swollen from fresh blows. And standing at the center, leaning casually with a cigar, was Reyes himself. "You had your chance," Reyes drawled, his accent thick, his smile cruel. "Money or blood, that was the deal." Daniel spat weakly at the floor, defiant even through the pain. "Go to hell," Reyes chuckled. "Brave but stupid." He raised his hand, signaling one of his men. And that's when Vin stepped out of the shadows. He said. Vin growled, his voice carrying like thunder. "Go to hell." Every head snapped toward him. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then one of the thugs barked a laugh. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" Vin pulled back his hood, revealing his face under the dim light. Gasps rippled. Even Reyes froze, recognition flickering. "No way," one of the men whispered. "That's Vin Diesel," Reyes finished, narrowing his eyes. His smile faded into something sharper. "So the big movie star thinks he can play hero in my house." Vin stepped closer, his gaze locked on Daniel. "Not hero," he said flatly. "Family." Reyes's men closed in, but Vin didn't flinch. He had fought bigger battles, on and off the screen. And this was personal. The warehouse crackled with tension. What happened next would decide everything: Daniel's life, Emily's future, and Vin's secret. And as Reyes gave the order to attack, Vin braced himself for the storm. The warehouse fell into silence for a split second, the kind of silence that precedes chaos. Reyes lowered his cigar, his eyes narrowing as Vin Diesel stepped fully into the light. The disbelief on the faces of Reyes's men gave way to laughter, mocking, careless, the laughter of men who thought numbers guaranteed victory. But Vin stood unshaken. He had walked onto countless sets where danger was choreographed. But this wasn't a performance. This was raw, real, and more important than any blockbuster. Reyes's voice cut through the noise, low and sharp. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, Diesel. This isn't one of your movies. Out here, the tough guy doesn't always win." Vin's gaze didn't waver. He looked straight at Daniel, who sat tied and bruised, fear and hope flickering in his eyes. Then Vin looked back at Reyes. "I don't need to play tough," he said. "I just don't back down when family's on the line." Reyes smirked, flicking ash to the floor. "Big words. Let's see if they mean anything." He gestured sharply, and 3 of his men surged forward. Vin moved before they could close in. Years of fight training and stunt work had honed his body into a weapon, but this wasn't about technique, it was about grit. The first man lunged, swinging a pipe, but Vin ducked low and drove his shoulder into the thug's gut, sending him crashing to the ground. Another came at him from the side. Vin's fist connected with his jaw, dropping him like a stone. The third tried to grab him from behind, but Vin spun, slamming an elbow into the man's ribs. Chaos erupted. Daniel shouted through the gag, struggling against his ropes. Reyes's men swarmed, but Vin met them head-on, a force of controlled fury. Punches flew, boots slammed against concrete, bodies hit the floor. Despite the odds, Vin fought like a man possessed. Every strike powered by more than muscle. It was powered by conviction. But numbers mattered. Soon Vin found himself outflanked. A fist clipped his jaw, a kick slammed into his ribs. He staggered, breath ragged. One of Reyes's men pulled a knife, blade glinting under the dim lights. From the shadows, Emily's voice rang out. Vin looked up, and in that instant, something inside him surged. Pain faded, replaced by raw determination. He caught the knife wielder's wrist mid-swing, twisted hard, and sent the blade skittering across the floor. Then, with a roar, he knocked two men back with sheer strength, clearing space around him. Reyes, watching from his perch, frowned. This wasn't going as planned. He waved a hand, and the men backed off. Panting, groaning, Vin stood in the center, chest heaving, sweat dripping, bruises already forming but unbroken. Reyes stepped forward slowly, clapping once, mocking, impressive, very impressive. But what's your endgame, Diesel? You think you can take me down and walk away? You'll never stop men like me. There's always another debt. Another kid desperate enough to sign his life away. Vin's eyes burned with quiet fire. Then tonight, it ends with you. Reyes chuckled, shaking his head. You can't fight the system. Maybe not, Vin said, but I can fight you. The two men faced off, celebrity versus criminal, symbol versus predator. Reyes was no brawler. He fought dirty, jabbing, swinging heavy objects, anything to gain an edge. But Vin absorbed every blow, countering with the strength of someone who had carried entire worlds on his back. The fight was brutal, unpolished, real. Concrete cracked under their weight, metal clanged as they crashed into crates. Finally, Vin landed a crushing blow to Reyes's jaw, sending him sprawling. Reyes scrambled back, reaching for a pistol tucked under a crate. The gun gleamed as he raised it, aiming straight at Vin.